Good day, and welcome to Narayan's Weekly Wraps. I am Vav Govinda, and this week we're going to be covering the Trump tariff developments, Elon Musk leaving DOGE and what that means going forward, as well as Nvidia's results. So starting off with the Trump tariffs. For those that have been following the news, what's happened is that a panel of judges, 3 judges from appointees by Reagan and all the way to Obama, have come out with a ruling that says effectively that the latest Trump tariffs, a large majority of them, are actually not legal and should be reversed. And that means not only they do not have effects going forward, but the money collected from them may have to be repaid to the people that pay them. The reason for this is quite simple. Trump has used some extremely aggressive interpretations of certain regulations, etc., in order to push these tariffs through. This is not the first time he's done this. I mean, he's done this also with regards to immigration, where he's gone out and used a law that was meant to prevent or to deal with any invasion from foreign governments to basically go after illegal immigrants in the U.S., saying basically that the number of immigrants are so large that they effectively form an invasion, and therefore you can use this illegal aliens law from centuries ago. Now, the ruling, like I said, went against Trump. What does it mean going forward? Firstly, Trump is being denied his policies, not because the policies themselves are illegal. It's because the way he's going about doing it is not using the powers that are given to the president. He should be, to get these things pushed through, he should be using Congress and the Senate, and to get these laws made, these changes made in terms of taxation, which is what tariffs effectively are. Had he done that, the court would not have been able to basically reverse it. It's only because he's trying to do this unilaterally that we are seeing this kind of pushback, and the successful pushback by opponents. Now, the Trump administration is only in the first 6 months of the first year of a 4-year term. There's a lot more time to go through. And his party technically is in power, both in the Congress and the Senate, until next year. So we're talking about a long time that he still has to do something. That being said, the tariffs are really unpopular, not just in terms of in the marketplace, but among Republicans as well. Republicans are much more free trade, much more anti taxation, anti restrictions on trade than the general population. Then therefore, you can imagine there's a lot more Republican pushback than you would think, even though it's the president's own party. So it's going to be quite difficult for the president to be able to push through these tariffs, using basically his majorities in the Congress and the Senate, because there's enough people in the Republican Party that don't like the tariffs that are going to be stopping it. And also, the Democrats have no desire to help him on any of these things, so it's unlikely for that to go through. But that being said, I do think that he will try and find other ways to get around this particular, roadblock. The law is vast, the law is complicated, and there's maybe more than one interpretation that could allow him to do something similar to this without using this particular set of powers. And also, I think thinking going forward here from what his overall plans are for the U.S. economy, the tariffs are quite important, not just because it's about fair trade and whatever, but he was looking to use them as a source of revenue generation. And like I mentioned, these tariffs are not just reversed. He's going to have to pay back some of this money. The government has to pay back some of this money, because if the tariffs were not legal in the first place, the people that paid money in the tariffs already, they should be getting the money back. But the money that was collected by the tariffs, going back to the original point, was part of a big plan on Trump's part to basically reduce tax collection for things like income tax, etc. And had his plan worked out, like I mentioned before many times, it would have been an incredibly popular thing, I think, among the people of the US. Even at a smaller percentage of tariffs than we currently saw being advertised, it would raise like tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars for the US government. That would have let the US government be able to go out and, for instance, reduce taxation for people making the medium income and below to zero. If the full amount had gone through, it would have basically allowed people who would almost double their medium income in the US to pay zero taxation, for income tax anyway. That would have been incredibly popular. And so taxes are a big part of Trump's philosophy and agenda. The fact that he's hitting this pushback here, as well as in other places as well, does indicate that some of these kind of political issues are not going to go forward as easily as we had thought, or he'd hoped at least. But that being said, the policies themselves are not illegal. Tariffs are perfectly legal. Deportations for immigrants are perfectly legal. You just got to do it in the legal way. And it's quite possible that he'll find a way, another law, another loophole, etc., to get around this particular regulation and still have some form of tariffs in play. I do think that in terms of the tariff, debate, it's not over just yet. We are likely to see this continue for quite some time going forward. And like I mentioned, we are basically not even a quarter of the way through his basically second term yet, and so don't expect him to basically give up on what he considered to be one of the pivotal points of his policies, a policy agenda. Like he said many times, to him, tariffs is one of the most beautiful words around. Next, Elon Musk has left DOGE. Now, this had to happen. The laws that were used to appoint him to his position restrict employment to like 100-something days, 130 days, I believe, per year. And so he's pretty much hit that kind of level. And he wanted to go and have a full-time position and say be in government for the full year or something. There would have been different laws, different regulations that would have come into play. Might have needed him to go in front of a panel like the Senate to basically answer questions about his appointment, etc., be vetted, etc. I don't think he wanted to do that. I don't think remember, he still has SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and a bunch of other companies to look at. Grok, XAI, Twitter. Those things basically would not have been viable to be run by him. He was spending the entire time taking or running DOGE, even though technically that's not exactly his designation. He would have basically had to have had some kind of almost advisory role being put in place there to allow him to basically have the participation in government he did without, for instance, divesting of a bunch of his assets and without having to go through the panels we talked about. But despite all that fancy kind of thing, he was really in charge of DOGE. Now, DOGE seems to have hit a huge roadblock, not only because Musk is leaving, but because it doesn't seem that US politicians on the Republican side want to do these things. Remember, government spending is really, really popular. You cut government spending, no matter what it is, you're going to find somebody's losing a paycheck, somebody losing a job, some supplier losing a client. And those people are very motivated to not just vote, but also contribute to politicians as well. DOGE looking to cut, hundreds of billions. At one point, they were talking about trillions in terms of spending for the US. That would have been extremely unpopular among the people that would have lost money on this thing. And there would have been very motivated donors and voters based on that. And so politicians don't want to incur that kind of wrath. So, Republican politicians don't really want to have DOGE go forward as strongly as it was. And in fact, the big, beautiful bill that Trump has put forward, not only, was not cutting spending, it has increased spending significantly, and I think that on net spending, spending, minus taxation, because the tax cuts have been pretty substantial that Trump wants to push through. And Elon Musk has come out and said, kind of a slap back at Trump that you can have a bill that's big or a bill that's beautiful. You can have a bill that's both big and beautiful, And he's also mentioned the fact that he's not looking to spend much more money in terms of political spending going forward. So it does appear that he's not just leaving DOGE because of the, like I mentioned, the 130 days or so that is allowed to be in there, but also because I think he's a bit disillusioned about what's possible in government. In addition to that, we are seeing a little bit of a setback coming with his company, SpaceX. It recently launched Starliner, the latest version of Starliner. There was hopes that it would be one of those successful launches and recoveries. The launch was pretty successful. The recovery was not. It does appear that at least his plans of going to Mars are going to be a little delayed because he's not able to get Starliner, running safely soon enough. So combine, disillusionment, combine the fact that the law says he can't stay there for much longer, along with the fact that his companies probably do need a bit of attention, and we are seeing what we're getting right now, which is basically Musk leaving and looking to in my view, really looking to reduce his exposure to politics for the short term at least. Whether he'll step back in next year when there's these midterm elections, which are important because should the Republicans lose the midterms significantly in the Congress and the Senate, that means the last couple of years of Trump's administration are going to be significantly hampered in terms of his ability to do anything. So he might step in next year. But for the moment, I think it's pretty much over for Musk in government. Now, moving on to Nvidia results. Nvidia came out with results, earnings significantly worse than expected because of a bit of a hit from the inability to sell stuff to China. They took a multi-billion-dollar write-off to some of these chips that they created specifically for the Chinese market, which they will not obviously be able to sell because the rules around it changed. That being said, the market rallied significantly after hours on that news of earnings. Why? Because it indicates that the US, Nvidia rather, is still seeing a huge amount of demand for its chips. And that demand is looking a bit stronger, excluding China, of course, because of what's happened there, than had been anticipated. And we've seen knock-on effects with ASML. We've seen knock-on effects with some of the other chip makers out there as well. Companies that contribute or are suppliers to Nvidia also rising on the news. Now, all this together makes you believe that we are still seeing quite a strong buildup of AI space, or AI capacity rather. Remember, training chips, creating these models, which has been the biggest source of demand for AI until recently, is only part of the equation. The bigger equation is going to be inferring, using these models, using these programs to actually do things. And for that, you need to have inference chips. We've seen the latest, a lot of, announcements from, for instance, Google with the VEO, 3 that's come out. I'm sure by now every one of you have seen these videos where, the AI created videos are not just look very realistic, but also have very realistic audio as well, including speaking, singing, accents, the whole lot. You've seen, people spending a couple $100 to do, unbelievably realistic, AI videos around, a number of different things. I think one of the more impressive ones was a fake pharmaceutical ad. That is the next step for AI. Even if there was no progress in AI models right now, so models kind of plateaued at the moment, you would still see demand for AI chips go up into the future. Why? Because people would be needing that to use the current models. So you build the model, you have to use it now, and using that model also requires these chips. And I think Nvidia has an advantage in inference, not as big as the advantage it has in training, but a significant advantage, which does help the company going forward. Next, we are seeing a bit of a thawing out, I think, among what's happening with regards to sanctions by the US versus China in terms of AI chips. Nvidia still thinks that it can sell some kind of chip that's hobbled for a bit to get within the restrictions of the US government for exporting chips to China. I think that it's a dangerous strategy. I mean, we've already seen that fail for them last year because of the chips that they built for China were effectively then banned after they built them, and that was caused a multi-billion-dollar write-down. But I think it's too big a market to miss out on. China is just too large a market to miss out on. Jensen Huang has come out and said that he sees that China is really a formidable rival to the US producers in terms of both chips and AI. And I think he's, when you have that kind of money like Jensen Huang has, as well as the kind of cultural clout he has, as well as basically the motivation to influence, towards lawmakers as much as he has, then that message is getting through to politicians that if the US goes out and effectively bans, the sale of chips to countries that it doesn't think are entirely trustworthy, all it's going to mean is that there's going to be a separate chip industry developed in China, and all those countries, including China, that are unable to buy US chips to the extent they want, are going to be effectively captive customers of the Chinese producer, which is not exactly what the US government wants to have happen. So yeah, the results are a little mixed, but the forecast for the future looks spectacular. And I think the forecast is what's really driving the market at the moment. And we are seeing, like I said, huge amounts of demand for Nvidia, as well as chip affiliated kind of companies out there. Not just companies that make chips, but also companies that supply things to chips, like SK Hynix, which does high bandwidth memory, etc. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to speaking again next week. Cheers.